Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans CUNY and Peter G. Peterson Fund, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind. And for years and years, I've been reading what today's guest has written, assigned, edited, or had edited for the New York Times long before I had the temerity to ask him to join us here. Bill Keller became the Times executive editor a decade ago. He had joined the paper in 1984 in the Washington Bureau, was a Times correspondent in Moscow from 1986 to 1991, the last 3 years as its bureau chief, winning a Pulitzer Prize in 1989 for his coverage of the USSR. He then became the Times bureau chief in Johannesburg, then the paper's foreign news editor, then its managing editor, then its top newsman as executive editor. Now Bill Keller is a much-read op-ed columnist for the New York Times, truly a man for all times. Yet it was his intriguing column last month on smart drones that immediately occasioned my request that he join us here. And in preparing for today's conversation, I've read a good many pieces that Bill Keller has written, and I hope that he and you will bear with me if I skip from one to another today. But let's go to the drone piece. Mm-hmm. What really lay behind that in your thinking?
I have a kind of long-standing fascination with the geekier aspects of our military. I spent a little bit of time as a Pentagon correspondent way back in the Caspar Weinberger years, and have from time to time written about one aspect or another of it, and the technology and how it affects the ways of war, I just find fascinating. Drones have been in the news a lot, and there's been a lot written about the kind of questions of how we use them now, whether how much license a president should have to direct assassinations, whether there's something sort of unsavory and antiseptic about this long-distance way of killing bad guys, and certainly about the questions about the collateral damage, so-called, the deaths of civilians in these attacks. That's been written about pretty well, but the one thing that had not really been touched on in what I was reading was the fact that the drones we have today are on a continuum, and the continuum leads towards autonomy, is what they call it in the military field. That is to say, at this point, there is a man in a control room, usually a man, but sometimes a woman, in a control room, directing the drone, firing the weapon, deciding whether or not this is the person that they want to get, and firing it off. We are not all that far away from a day when the machine itself decides, when it would, and in fact there are a couple of deployed systems that come sort of close. In the military they refer to human in the loop, which is basically what the drones are now, the ones that are operating over Afghanistan and Pakistan and Yemen and elsewhere.
Where there is a human.
Where there is a human in the loop. There's human on the loop, where the machine has an assignment and can go out and has a measure of autonomy, but it has a human watching over its shoulders, so to speak, who can abort the mission at any time. And then you have human out of the loop, which is not the kind of fantasy of Terminator, you know, the robot killer coming back from the future, but is the closest thing that I could find to something that actually exists is a weapon that the Israelis have deployed. And what it does is it flies around on its own, flies these sort of lazy patterns, and it reads radar signals, the signals that come off of radar. And it has in its electronic memory, I almost said mind, in its electronic memory, a database of friendly radar signals. And when it encounters a radar signal that is not friendly, it presumes that that is probably some anti-aircraft installation that's hostile. And it can immediately transform itself into a dive bomb and strike that weapon, that radar installation. You know, that's about as, I think there are a number of people who are critical of this tendency in weaponry who would say that one already crosses a line. But certainly there are things on the drawing boards that you know, take this farther and farther. And it sounds futuristic, but once you get, you know, on that slippery slope, there are a lot of things that kind of keep the tendency going. The military wants it because it wants to have the best weapons possible, and they particularly like this because it means they're not putting troops at risk, and that's, of course, the commanders, the highest price an army pays. There are commercial pressures to keep this thing going because people manufacture them and sell them. There are 70-some countries that have the regular piloted drones that we operate. They don't all make them. There are some countries that make them and sell them, and they're a good business.
Has Israel made them and sold them?
Yes. I don't think they've sold this weapon that I was referring to before, but they do make and sell drones. And then there's just the pressure of science. I mean, my youngest daughter, who's now 10, is in a robotics club, and it is a huge thing in schools around the world, sponsored by Lego and companies like that, which provide the kind of ingredients for the first robot makers. And I went to one of the competitions, the regional competition at the Javits Center in New York with my daughter, because her team made the finals, or semifinals, I guess they were. And it's very sweet, and it's a great thing. I mean, these kids are learning how. And what's especially sweet about it, I think, is that there are a lot of girls doing it. So it's, you know, the notion that technology, the future of technology is in the hands of boys is going to be disproven. But science doesn't like to say we'll only go this far and then we'll stop discovering stuff. So there's military, commercial, and scientific research pressures for these things to develop all the capabilities they can.
Isn't this the place where we just shrug our shoulders and say, well, that's the way it's going to be? How do you stop that? You talk about slippery slope.
It's very hard to stop it. There are a number of organizations, including some of the people who were involved in getting landmines banned, which was, although the United States has not signed on to that ban,
Indeed.
we don't deploy landmines, however. We follow the spirit of the agreement without having actually signed it, to our shame, I think. But some of the people who were involved in getting that enacted are on the case of what they call fully autonomous weapons.
Are you betting on the success of that effort?
No, I'm not. I mean, I hope for the success of that effort, but no, I would not. I'm not terribly optimistic, but I applaud them for trying, and I will probably applaud them again from time to time in a column.
Does this make you, as some people have accused you of being a Luddite? You mentioned that before we went on the program, and indeed, there was a piece that you had done. I'll find it here, the one on the Twitter.
The Twitter trap, it was called.
Talking about your daughter, and that was 8 years ago. How's she done with?
No, it wasn't 8 years ago.
Wasn't it?
It was, I think, 3, maybe 2 or 3.
Was it that?
2 or 3.
Well, I'll find it.
It was right in the closing days of my time as executive editor when I was writing a column occasionally for the magazine.
You're right, it was 2011.
Yeah.
But you say, I don't mean to be a spoiled sport, and I don't think I'm a Luddite.
Right.
But are you or aren't you?
Well, you know, I had 8 years as executive editor of the Times, and the last 5 or 6 of those were spent helping to transform the New York Times into a digital news operation with considerable success, both in terms of reaching a much broader audience, but also using the technology in innovative ways to gather news and to tell stories. I mean, I walk through, I'm still allowed, even though I'm up on the opinion floor now, I still have an all-access pass, and I do walk through the newsroom from time to time. And it's, you know, people still refer to it as the gray lady, which implies a kind of hidebound aversion to change, a kind of small c conservative attitude towards everything. I tell you, the New York Times newsroom now is like a laboratory, and they've tried all sorts of innovative things with interactive graphics and with audio and with data number crunching as a way of supplying content for stories. And I think that's a good thing. So no, I don't think I'm a Luddite. I think I've certainly embraced the fact that my business now lives in a digital world, even though that's sometimes unsettling. But I guess I would say I recoil a little bit from people who tend to treat technology as a dogma or a religion. It's a tool, an extremely useful tool that can be used for good things and can be used for bad things. And there is something of a tendency among you know, sort of young people who have incorporated so much of the social media and the new world into their lives to say, you know, if you're not with it, you're not cool, you're backwards, you're a Luddite and or a technophobe. You know, I use social media. My children use social media much more than I do. But, you know, throughout history, new technologies have always been absorbed at a cost. I said in that column that, you know, my father, who was an MIT chemical engineer and a slide rule generation guy, used to complain that since everybody had pocket calculators, nobody knew how to do arithmetic anymore. And he's kind of right. A lot of those math skills, you know, have atrophied as we depend on the new technology.
What skills do you think are going to go by the board, maybe indeed have gone by the board in terms of our new technology? Skills or human approaches to
well, some of both. I mean, you know, I find it's just in the category of skills. I used to know how to drive myself around Los Angeles. I went to school not far from there. Now, when I go to Los Angeles, I rent a car with a GPS system, and the machine tells me when to turn right and when to turn left. And I've completely lost my sense of direction in a city that I once, you know, thought that I knew. There's a lot of that sort of thing. The part of the column that produced the loudest kind of moans of indignation from the true believers. I'm using loaded language, I know, but I'm a columnist, so I guess I'm allowed to. The loudest complaints came when I talked about social media. And I said a couple things about social media. First of all, that at least the very kind of quick response, Twitter in particular, which is designed for, you know, wisecracking exchanges and sharing links to other things, is not a great place to have a discussion. And the title of the column came from a little experiment that I conducted where I tweeted, "Twitter makes you stupid, discuss." And everybody reacted to the Twitter makes you stupid, but not to the discuss. And in fact, it is not a very good place to have a civil discussion. It's good for other things. It's just not very good for that. I worry, you know, to some extent, that if all of your social life exists online, you miss something. If your idea of a friend is somebody that you've friended on Facebook, you may be missing out the kind of experience that comes from having friends that you go out for coffee with and you know, share your secrets with, not in a way that's been written down or photographed and posted, but that just sort of emerges from real human contact. I worry a bit about that. I'm not apocalyptic about that we're going to lose our ability to love, but I worry that that something may be lost.
But doesn't that fit in to your first concern about drones that are self-driven? Isn't there a parallel? Isn't there a similarity there?
Yeah, there's, they're both examples of the fact that these are tools, and tools are to be used, and tools should be controlled. And when the tools begin to control you, that's a little scary.
And you think we have reason to be scared?
I think we have reason to be anxious, let's say. I'm somewhere on the continuum between a little nervous and panicked. I'm closer to the a little nervous.
Well,
side.
I'm much older than you, so that I'm
you
very
can panic.
nervous, and I'm panicked about them. But
I'm reassured by the fact that I have kids who use social media as a kind of mainstay of their social lives. The older one does anyway. The younger one's still 10, and she doesn't do much. We don't let her do that much. But my daughters are still quite wonderful, nearly perfect.
that's great. And I'm sure when they hear that, they'll not think of you as, there goes Dad again. You know, there were so many things I said at the beginning that I wanted to ask you about, having to do with the press and other things. One had to do with a piece you wrote, all the aggregation that's fit to aggregate. And that does seem to me, it seemed to me that it was such an important thing to worry about. But I sort of find it reflected in the Gray Lady herself, with the emphasis so much now on opinion and aggregating opinions and publishing them.
Well, we all aggregate, you know, if you use the term broadly, and always have. And I mean, a newspaper story is an aggregation of facts and opinions that you didn't originate or invent. You collected from other people.
But you went out to collect them.
You went out to collect them, and you usually attributed the information to the, you know, to the experts or individuals that you interviewed, and to the documents that you cited. So aggregation per se is not evil.
What is?
Well, I have two things that I would say about aggregation, which is, you know, I mean, you're right that the New York Times does a lot more of the kind of aggregating that is not just going out and interviewing people and putting their quotes into a newspaper article. We post people's comments after our articles and opinion pieces and columns, sometimes hundreds of them. We have a blog called The Lead, which is very heavily aggregation, and what it serves to do on occasions when we don't have a reporter somewhere is to kind of sort through what other media have said, or what individual sort of civilians tweeting and posting things to YouTube have said. Its first great accomplishment, I think, was during the 2009 upheavals in Iran, when I was there for part of that, and then they kicked all the foreign reporters out, and our aggregator blog, The Lead, put together information coming mostly through social media and occasionally from other journalists who had found other ways to gather information, and assembled it all and tried to make sense of it. So we aggregate all the time. The 2 points that I try to make about aggregation are, first of all, it's no substitute for going there. And going there is expensive, sometimes risky. It's often inconvenient. But going and actually bearing witness is not something that you can replace with just aggregating the opinions of others. And the second thing is, there's a line between recommending that readers go look at somebody else's work and just stealing it. And some of the aggregators publish so much of other people's work, and at the end they may put a link, but by the time you're done, you've read so much of somebody else's work that you have no need to actually go there and maybe generate the few cents of income that your visit would generate through, by clicking on an ad. I mean, it costs money to do the going there and bearing witness.
But I don't think it's only a matter of dollars that you're concerned about, is it?
No, I think it's there's an ethical question here too. We're still trying to figure out where that line is. I mean, the latest case is this new television software that promises to, if you pay them a fee, they will fish out of the airwaves all of the broadcast signals from the networks and give you their stuff live if you want, or stored if you want, on your cell phone. Needless to say, the TV producers are up in arms, and on this one, my hearts are with them. Not that I particularly love everything that appears on television, but it's hard, expensive stuff to produce, and it's hard for me to justify swiping it and reselling it, with no reimbursement to the people who produced it.
Turning to something very, very different, I told you before we began our program that my wife insisted, knowing who was going to be my guest today, that I've got to ask you about this. This is a quote from you from somewhere, because I didn't identify it as I wrote it down. We have sometimes, talking about the press in general, we have sometimes been too even-handed, giving equal time to arguments that fail a simple fact check, so that the New York Times, for instance, will report something outrageous that someone has said. And as I look at it, I'm going to be 88 for 80 of those years. I've been reading the New York Times, and I, by and large, believe what I read in the New York Times, or at least I think that old symbol up at the top, all the news that's fit to print, means it wouldn't be there if it weren't fit to print. What's your fix on printing a statement, a charge, an item that you know?
Yeah, when I wrote that, I didn't have in mind a particular offense. It's more of a chronic problem.
It makes it worse.
It does. I should say up front that I believe in trying to be even-handed. There is a school of thought that journalists should just abandon any pretense to objectivity.
Right.
Declare your politics and your ideology and all your views up front. I think that's a mistake. I mean, I know that it's part of the culture of some places. I have friends who work for The Guardian. In fact, I have a wife who works for The Guardian in the English paper, and their culture is much more kind of overtly partisan. But ours is not, and I think there's a real advantage to withholding your opinion, partly because once you've spoken it, you feel some sort of impulse to defend it, and that makes you automatically less open-minded to the other point of view. So I am a believer in trying to be fair and balanced in presenting the news. But, presenting
the news.
Yes.
The news or the views?
Presenting the news, and well, so the news often consists of views. I mean, if you're writing about the politics of the budget debate, you know, you want to hear from the Republicans and the Democrats that maybe nothing happened, maybe the news is nothing but warring views. But, you know, for a long time, my paper, everybody's paper, treated climate science as if it were a theory, the notion that there's global warming and that human conduct contributes to it. And I think probably out of an excess of a sort of distorted sense of fair play, well beyond the point when the consensus of science was clear, we all sort of continued to tip our hats to the denialist view. We don't really do that anymore. Certainly the Times doesn't. I don't speak for you know, the entire business, but my sense as a reader is that it has now become, nobody now feels obliged when writing about the latest dispute over, you know, cap and trade or carbon taxing or whatever, to pretend that it's an unresolved question whether or not the climate is changing. I'm sure there are lots of other things out there, you know, where we are still leaning a little too hard on the tradition of even-handedness and probably giving one side more than it's due.
You see, I didn't mean even-handedness, because I'd certainly go along with that, but I meant where, you know, in this quote, that fail a simple fact check.
Mm-hmm.
But this is for us to continue if you're willing to stay here and do a second program, because believe it or not, we've come to the end of
I'm happy
our
to
time
stay.
here. Good.
Yeah.
Then thank you so much for joining me today, Bill Keller, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes, meaning next week. Thanks.
Okay.
And thanks to you in the audience. I hope you'll join us again next time as well. Meanwhile, as an old friend used to say, good night and good luck. And do visit the Open Mind website at 13.org/openmind to reprise this program online right now, or to draw upon our archive of 1,500 or so other Open Mind and related programs. That's 13.org/openmind. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans CUNY and Peter G. Peterson Fund, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.